Hello everybody and welcome to English in the Afternoon. Today we'll talk about the passive voice. This video is part 1 of the lesson. In order to understand the passive voice, we first have to understand the active voice. In English, most sentences are made the same way. They begin with a subject, which can be a person, a country, an animal, a pronoun, a company, a car, a chair, basically anything that the sentence is about. After the subject is the predicate. And the predicate is basically everything else in the sentence. However, a key part of the predicate has to be the verb. Remember, if the sentence does not have a verb, it is not a complete sentence. And of course, the verb can appear in many forms, in the past, present, future. Sometimes a sentence has an object in the predicate. The object is connected to the subject because it explains what the subject did to the object. In other words, the object receives the action of the subject. For example, if we said, Sam is building a house, the subject of this sentence is Sam, the verb is building, and the object is a house. Or, my friend invited John to the party. Here, the subject of the sentence is my friend, the verb is invited, and the object is John. These types of sentences we call active. In other words, if a sentence begins with a subject, it is active. However, we can also change the order of the sentence. So instead of beginning with the subject, we can turn it around and begin with the object. Instead of saying, Sam is building a house, we can say, a house is being built by Sam. And instead of saying, my friend invited John to the party, we can say, John was invited to the party by my friend. And here, if we begin the sentence with the object, we call them passive. But you might be thinking, why would I need to begin a sentence with the object? Why would I say John was invited to the party by my friend if I can say my friend invited John to the party? Well, there are a few reasons. The first reason why we would use the passive voice is if we don't know the subject of the sentence. In other words, we know what happened, but we don't know who did it. Let's say that you come back to a parking lot and you found out that somebody stole your car. You don't know who did it, but you know the car is not where you left it. You would need to use the passive voice to explain that situation. My car was stolen. Or if somebody asks you about the history of paper, you would say paper was invented in China. You would need to use the passive voice because you don't know who invented it, but you know that it has been invented. The second reason we use the passive voice is if the subject is not that important or we don't really care about who did the action. For example, the phone was produced by a new tech company. Here, the emphasis is on the product, not the company. It's the phone that's important to the conversation. Or we see a beautiful house and then somebody tells us the house was built in 1929. Again, we don't really care who built it. We just care that it's there and that it's beautiful. The third reason we use the passive voice is if we want to focus on the action. In other words, it's not important who did something, it's only important that the action was done. Therefore, we can often hear people say, everybody was rescued from the burning building. Here, the action is important. Or, all the orders have been delivered. It doesn't matter who delivered it, it's just important that it's done. These three reasons for using the passive voice might overlap a little bit, but I think you get the general idea. Now, there are three other things we should keep in mind when using the passive voice. The first one is that we can choose to say the subject or to leave it out. For instance, we could say, the cake was eaten, or the cake was eaten by my classmates. In this one, we don't mention the subject, but in this one we do. The choice is up to you. If we want to make a sentence where we include the subject, we need to say by and then add the subject. For instance, the phone was designed by Apple. The book was written by Charles Resnicoff. The last bag was bought by that lady. Of course, this is not always necessary, but we cannot do this with all sentences. And this brings us to the second point. Not all sentences can be made into the passive voice. This is because of something called transitive and intransitive verbs. Transitive verbs are verbs that need an object in the sentence. For example, we cannot just say, I saw, my mom took, she brings, they borrow. These sentences don't make sense because there are no objects in the sentence. I saw what? Well, we need to provide an object here. I saw a cat, for example. Or my mom took what? Again, we will need to continue. My mom took my car keys. She brings a lot of experience to this position. They borrowed a lot of money. So when we have an object in the sentence, then we are able to make the sentence into the passive voice. I saw a cat would be the cat was seen by me. My mom took my car keys would be my car keys were taken by my mom. She brings a lot of experience to this position would be a lot of experience is brought to this position by her. They borrowed a lot of money was borrowed by them. Here's a larger list of transitive verbs. Take a look for a second. On the other hand, we also have intransitive verbs. When we use these verbs, we do not need an object in the sentence. For instance, the following sentences are all correct just the way they are. She left, they are standing, Grace listened, he died. All of these sentences can stand on their own without any additional information. When we say she left, it just means that she is no longer here. She left. That's all we need to know. Or they are standing. This can be a sentence on its own. Grace listened. Again, just a subject and a verb. That's all we really need in this sentence. Also, he died. He just died. None of these sentences need an object, and as a result, we cannot put them into the passive voice. Even if we continued these sentences and put more information in them, we could still not turn them into the passive voice. For instance, if we said, she left the store, we could not say, the store was left by her. This doesn't make any sense. Or, they are standing near the theater. We cannot say, the theater is stood by near. Actually, I don't even know how to finish this sentence because it really doesn't make any sense. Here is a list of some intransitive verbs. Take a look. In short, we can only turn sentences into the passive voice if they have transitive verbs. Otherwise, it doesn't work. My advice is not to memorize transitive and intransitive verbs, but just try to see if a sentence can be made into the passive voice. Your common sense will usually tell you if you are able to make a passive sentence or not. The third point is that all passive voice sentences must use the verb in the past participle. That means if we have these verbs here, for instance, we will always be using the verbs from this column. We must remember that at all times. Okay, we'll stop here for now. In the next video, we'll cover specific tenses in the passive voice.